Naila is a nationally recognized political strategist and campaign architect with established track record of influencing public policy through a gender justice equity lens, transformational issue campaigns, and commanded high-level leadership roles in nonprofit and government, where her advocacy work amplifies diverse voices and legislative conversation. Naila also has mobilizing grassroots efforts to progress social justice issues, and has positioned her as a soft after speaker, which is why we're happy she's here with us today, a thought leader in these spaces, as well as a media commentator. She holds a master's in public administration, public policy, and urban affairs, and dual degrees in political science and criminal justice, and is completing her PhD in political science.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Selena. And thank you, everyone else, for taking the time to be here. These are my favorite conversations to be in. While I may be a sought after speaker, I absolutely fundamentally am so passionate about sharing lessons I've learned with folks who are about to begin that journey or are somewhere already in the midst of their journey when it comes to identifying our spheres of influence individually and collectively in creating social change. So thank you for the invitation. I'm so excited for this conversation. I think it's important to begin with our North Star, right? Before we start talking about campaigns, I think it's really important to share with the group my why of like what orients myself to the work that I do, because that influences how I show up to and to do the work. You know, I wasn't necessarily radicalized through like a specific event, if you will, more so than I think just a gradual collection of experiences that I've gone through. But I think one of the most foundational experiences that really pivoted me from wanting to go into journalism. I was supposed to be a political journalist, but now I'm storytelling in a different way, was my experiences in the military, right? I joined the Army 4 days after high school graduation. I was one of 4 women working with roughly 200 men and really being exposed to an institution that was explicitly not designed for women, explicitly not designed for people of color. I really learned the consequences of not having any formal power and how that renders you invisible, and the pain and consequences that comes with not having power and being invisible. And so my experiences, while I'm very grateful for the time that I did have, I learned a lot about life. I learned a lot about leadership. On a personal level, it was foundational to me wanting to shift and identify my new life mission when I left the service, to create and expand spaces at the intersection of grassroots movements and government, to empower communities that were invisible the way that I felt invisible. And public policy is my chosen tool. There are a lot of different ways, as I'm sure you've had conversations with, or will have conversations with throughout this program, on how to move forward in creating social change. My preferred tool is public policy, with the recognition of the limitations, but also I lean into those opportunities. But I fundamentally look at policy as a tool, almost like a hammer. It can be used to build or it can be used to destroy. And my philosophy is public policy as a tool through collective action, guided by a North Star that is rooted in shared values with the people that you are building with, can build amazing institutions, can build amazing movements, or dismantle them if that's your orientation to social change. So that is very quickly, I think, for the group, to orient my why of like how I show up in these spaces, again, really rooted in my experiences of being invisible and wanting to use my skills and my credentials and my experiences to empower, specifically at that intersection of mobilization and government. And I think I missed the other prompt. Can you remind me of that last prompt was, Selena?
Oh, sure. So, it'll flow organically, but I was actually going to open it if Tier had any questions for you, because really would be curious. One, we gave them some back end information on the campaign. So if any
Mhm.
campaign specific questions folks have, they can bring it forward. But then also, let's dig in, what have been some of your challenges? Um, what have been some of your the biggest lessons that you've learned? You spoke about limitations of public policy, but then I also want to thank you. I think just naturally you being an organizer, bring it in your walk. And that's why I dropped in a chat. One of the things that we talked about in our last session, like our identity and placing ourselves in this work. So important to know who we
Mm.
are. And that really is inextricably connected to our why. Why do we do this work? Who are we? Right. So I thank you for bringing that. Um, yeah. Did anyone want to start off with any questions? Allow Naila to uh continue to share and pour into us. I see your hand. And please raise your hand. I'll drop the stack and we just engage that way. This ain't a class, y'all. It's a conversation and a dialogue. So go ahead, Autumn.
Oh, hi, Naila. Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet
Uh,
you too.
Let me turn my camera on for this question. One of the questions that I definitely do have is, especially with all you do, how do you kind of fight that feeling of being discouraged? Because I know, especially through your journey with everything there, I know you were probably faced with a lot of discouragement or a lot of discouraging, like, comments from people, like people probably telling you that you're not doing enough or that you should stop what you're doing. So how do you kind of fight that feeling?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Um, and in full transparency, as much as I've accomplished, um, there are still people who will question my competence and my abilities. And I think one of the most painful lessons, particularly for us as women, especially women of color, I think is acknowledging this reality that no matter what your established track record of success is, no matter what your credentials may be, your list of accomplishments can be longer than a CVS receipt. For people in this world, they will never see you, right? And I think that there is this tightrope that we have to balance in terms of acknowledging that this reality of no matter what we achieve, no matter our successes, we will still never ever be seen as worthy of leading organizations, as worthy of being in the room. And I have learned at this point in my life that I'm not going to say I'm at peace with it, but I found a way to manage of I don't do the work for those people. I do the work for the people who do not have the privilege or the access yet to be in those rooms. And so I think it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that this work can be devastating. As much as success as I've had working on campaigns, I've suffered just as many losses, right? People want to focus on the highlight reel. But the reality is that, this work is incredibly fulfilling because I know that the work that I do leads to changing the material conditions of people's lives for the better. And I also know that when I fall short, it means that people are still continuing to suffer the way that they were, right? And so that's really hard truth to sit in, right? But I also acknowledge that if I'm not doing this work, if I'm not going to that next meeting, if I don't, you know, brush myself off and go to the next action or go to that next strategy plan to learn where do we fall short, how do we fall short, why, and how do we fix it for the next session or for the next fight, however that may manifest. Who else will, right? And so I think it's an unfair pressure, but it's reality, right? There have been conversations that I have not been a part of, meetings that I've missed, and the decisions that were made in those meetings. Well, this is why we have flawed policies and flawed decisions, because there was not that voice countering, pushing back, asking the difficult questions on how racial justice or equity fall into this conversation. Um, so that's my long way of saying it's important to acknowledge that this work can be soul crushing. But what always brings me back into the fight every time is knowing that I'm not doing this work alone. I work in partnership with such amazing women amazing people. But it's oftentimes, other women of color who I'm working in partnership with, who do this work. And the last thing that I will say before I close out this question is acknowledging that it can be devastating and very discouraging. It's okay to tap out, right? I think that sometimes, especially with the pressures to always be perfect and to always be on and to be the best all the time at such an intense rate, it takes from you, right? And something I've learned in my journey is that I cannot be on all the time at the level of intensity that I have been. And so I have learned to give myself grace, and to say, I am taking a break. I cannot show up the way that I need to in order to make the impact I know is necessary. And that's okay, because the people that I've built relationships with in community in these organizing spaces every time have carried my weight in the spaces that I'm no longer to be able to be in. And then when I've taken that time to restore and to recalibrate and to heal, I'm able to come back into these spaces fully the way that I need to, and carry on the work for somebody else if they need a break as well. So it's a both and, right? Acknowledging how hard this work is and how draining it can be, while at the same time acknowledging how empowering and how powerful and how transformative it is, while in between those two spaces, being intentional about making time for yourself, to center your needs in terms of how you want to show up in this work, in the long term, to sustain for your own for your own well-being.
Thank you.
Yeah, y'all don't wait for me if y'all see your name and unmute.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like that was great to hear. I guess kind of maybe in the same realm, I was, thinking more about like holding space and taking back space, right? Like you were saying, feeling silenced. And I think sometimes as a woman in in a room of people of power, or maybe more power, right, than I might have, sometimes feeling like interrupted, or feeling like, maybe these people don't really care what I have to say. Like, how do you, I guess, navigate those situations? And if you have any like practical advice in terms of like taking back space in some of those environments.
I love that question. I'm a little bit later stage in my career than I imagine you ladies at this point. But I went through, and still do, to some degree, although not as much, dealing with the age factor. When I first started out, I was on the ground. I had amazing opportunities to be in spaces. Whereas if you didn't know my experiences or, my qualifications, you might be like, oh, she looks a little bit young to be here. Who is she? Why is she here? Is she the intern? Interns are very important people, by the way. I learned a physical trick is, if you are at a table, oftentimes women, we shrink ourselves and we organize our notepad, our pen or our pencil, your iPad, what have you. We try to restrict ourselves to take physically as little space as possible. And then I'll, sit down, and then I'll see a man come in and he'll spread his stuff across the whole table. I'm like, buddy, what's happening? And it's a small truth, but I think reflects how we see ourselves and how other people see us. Of like, why is it that a perfectly qualified woman who has just as much, if not more, experiences than the other men in the table, physically shrink ourselves to not take as much space, but the male intern will come in and just spread himself across the table. Physical trick is, don't shrink yourself at the table. Take up your space. Spread your laptops or your note-taking materials. Do not be afraid to take the space that you deserve at that table. I have learned it's kind of a psychological trick of like, I'm not going to shrink myself at this table. And so you're going to accommodate me in whatever space I need at it. Now, how does that translate to the psychological? As I shared in my previous response, a hard lesson is no matter what you achieve, there will always be people who don't believe that you deserve to be where you are. And with that said, I think when you're talking about tapping into the invisible part of our experiences, right? Either we're invisible or we're the target, right? Oftentimes it's both at the same time. And so how do we manage being hyper visible oftentimes because we're the only women of color in the room or on the team or the first, or our work is not acknowledged and someone else takes credit or receives credit, what have you. I have learned to build support systems within teams and also externally, right? So depending on your organization or if it's a campaign, identify those people who can help you in terms of making sure that your thoughts are being acknowledged. I know that a trick that I learned from, I think it was women staffers under the Obama administration, of like when women, we share an idea and nobody will say anything. And then the next guy will say literally the same thing that we just said. And everyone does backflips and cartwheels and is astounded by the ingenuity of the idea that was literally just said 30 seconds ago. What women developed a system in which they would pivot back and say, that's nice, Greg. I really like how you amplified Lauren's argument about XYZ, so that the idea, the credit of whatever they're working on is not erased. You can acknowledge it, but you're pivoting it back to the women who initially brought it up. And so I think finding systems of support internally within the team and also externally can help support, I think, just that visibility of being acknowledged for your contributions to the team in ways, again, that people who may not necessarily see your value, they will never see your value, but also understand there are people who do, and they want to help elevate that so other people recognize it as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nyla. My name is Adonich. Thank you for being here and sharing all of this. Two questions I have. I hope it's okay I ask. But the first one is like, I think sometimes in the work you get further and further from the community and like direct service work. So how do you ensure, even though you might be further from the population you really hope to serve and work alongside, that you're still centering their needs in all of the work? And then the second question is, how do you utilize like data and research in your work to amplify your advocacy?
I love this. So I'll answer the second question first. Data is important for a variety of audiences, right? Depending on which hat I'm wearing. Elected officials like to have data-informed policies, although oftentimes it's politically driven, but the data is like the nice neutral way for them to justify whatever it is that they're supporting or not supporting, right? I also think it's important to acknowledge that one of the gaps in data and in research is that your information that research is producing is only as good as the question, right? So one of the reasons why I'm pursuing my PhD is because as a practitioner, academia is so disconnected from anything that I actually do. So I want to go into a space so I can better understand and better shape the research questions so that we can better get to answers that are more that are of value, right, to practitioners. But that's because that's my orientation, so that the data that we're collecting is applicable to people who can use it, as opposed to research for other researchers, right? And that's a reality of academia. But the data is incredibly important, but also recognizing that the data can be inundated with the political as well. So it does inform my research, but I also know when to give it a side eye and when to double down on this is legit good research that captures what's important to me as a practitioner and to use that to inform my work in some way. Pivoting to your first question, how do I continue to center the people, the grassroots aspect, the further along, the different spheres that we work in? I love that question. My answer to that has been, I'm very cyclical in my work. I'll share an example. I used to work on Capitol Hill, loved my boss, hated the job, was miserable. And I had a job that people would die for. I had good government benefits, had a great, representative to work for, was absolutely miserable. And it took me a while to sit in that discomfort and ask myself, why am I so unhappy in a job that people would kill for? And I realized it's because every day I'm meeting with people who lead organizations, and I don't have my finger on the pulse of the community like I always have. And it was a learning lesson for me that in order for me to thrive and to jump out of bed, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed every morning, I needed that connection to community that I did not have in that space that I was in at that time. And so I've gone back and forth cycling of I can work in federal spaces, I can work at higher levels of government, but I always have to come to grassroots spaces, either through campaigns or through direct actions, organized issue campaigns. One, a cyclical approach. And two, when I am in those spaces that are a little bit more distant from the grassroots, in my personal time, right? So maybe professionally, I'm meeting with higher level people, but in my personal time, I'm still very much in the community board meetings. I'll be at that protest on Saturday, Saturday morning, first thing. And so finding ways in my personal capacity that I can continue to engage in the various spaces that breathe life into me, while professionally I am working in another space that is, still in pursuit of, trying to change things for the better, but just in a more a distant approach. Again, finding ways personally that I can become involved and giving back to the community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to do a time check. This is really awesome. So I hate to be that person, but they call that a facilitator's flex. So we scheduled Naila to stick around with us and be in community. No, to be in conversation until 7:50. So I know we have 3 more hands to have questions up, but Naila, you can us until the end of the session. Quite fine. You don't have to jump off. We're not kicking you out at 7:50. I'm just making sure that folks can probably may have to tweak a question too so that we can get to hear because there's so much wisdom that's being shared. And I'm curious to hear everyone's question as well. So go ahead, Ash.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. I want to give a little bit of context for my question. So a lot of what you said I can relate to. I told the women earlier, I've been in the tech world for the last 10 years and like corporate for 15. And a lot of this like work around advocacy is a bit foreign to me. However, like I said, a lot of what you said is relatable. Like I woke up one day and was like, what am I doing? I have all these like incredible skills and I hate the tech industry at this point. I'd rather use my skills for something meaningful. And I believe in the power of collective action. I think there's so many similarities that we experience cross industry as women and as women of color. I'm curious, like, what your perspective is on how to bring other individuals into the fold, into this work. Like, you're doing it day in, day out, as so many women in like advocacy and policy are. Do you have any recommendations, tips, or suggestions for how to create more, I guess, inspired action from people in other industries? Because I think a lot of my peers probably wouldn't even know where to begin.
Right, absolutely. I love that question, and thank you for asking it. Because I've had to what's the term, check myself or like hold myself accountable because I live and breathe advocacy. Sometimes I forget other people don't live and breathe advocacy as well, right? And so I do try to be in spaces where people with like regular people, right? People who don't know about the white paper that was just published, or don't know about this bill that's about to be introduced at tomorrow's council meeting, or people, there is an entire life outside of policy and advocacy as a profession, where everyday people who might consider themselves, as, concerned citizens, they might vote, they might not. And so one of the things for me has been learning to speak to people, not so much about, engagement because it's important, because it matters. That's my North Star. I know that it matters, right? But I found that when you talk to people about the issues that are important to them, that impact them, that is the segue into bringing them into this journey of activism, right? And I also think it's important to think about activism in a very broad spectrum. Activism is not a professional person like me who, does the work that I do. You could be an activist by showing up at a local meeting. You can be an activist by writing an op-ed about an issue that's important to you. And so for me, I have learned to bring people who do not live and breathe advocacy, talking to them just about the issues that they're concerned about, and then understanding the different ways to become involved in changing that issue that they are concerned about. And there's a shift that happens in people, I have found, where people will say, that's a problem and I don't like that, through conversations of education, of empowerment, where people recognize that they are the solution to that problem, right? And that's an incredibly, I think, powerful moment in someone's journey, because now you have engaged them in this process of redefining power, and recognizing that they have power and agency to engage in systems and processes and decision making, be it individually or collectively, to be a change agent, right? Where they might be a dentist or an accountant, or, just a regular person who, again, may not necessarily be a professional advocate, but just has just as much impact as myself, in terms of, leading the change for what they want to see in their communities. Leading with, again, identifying issues that are important to them and identifying those opportunities to engage them in things that change it.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us, and everything you said was just so affirming. So thank you so much for really speaking the truth, and it makes me think so much about two things. One is what's going on right now in Congress, and the very, very sad, for me, sad and overwhelming moment that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had, that is literally hurts my heart. And also it made me think about a book that I'm reading called I'm Not Yelling, by Elizabeth Leba, which is absolutely incredible. And I wrote to her and told her, like, it's so affirming to know that it's not just me feeling this. So my question is, looking into these spaces and always looking for advancement and thinking about ways to be better, I think there's always this juggling act of making sure that we are self-promoting in a great way, but also not coming across as arrogant. And I love that you said feeling invisible, because I feel like it's either I'm unseen or I'm sort of overseen, right? That it's too much. And that's not necessary. I had a supervisor tell me before, like, titles mean nothing. And I had a really great candid conversation with her. And I said, look, titles in this world is one of the things that actually gives me legitimacy. It's what says I deserve the place at the table. So while for you, it feels like something that evens us out, the reason I went to school and the reason that I'm trying to go for my doctorate as well is so that, you do have a legitimate voice in the conversation. So any information or guidance you can provide, and even getting into the federal level, I would love to be in the federal level. So any guidance you have on that, I'd love to hear.
Absolutely. Very, very quickly, because I do want to be respectful of your time. That's a lot. I think in terms of tapping into like the invisible part, one of the lessons I've learned the hard way, right, is that if we don't toot our own horn, then other people will take credit for the work that you do, right? And the Achilles heel is when we toot our own horn, people say, "Oh, she's to this or she's to that," you know, she's a show off. And we're taught to be humble, right? I mean, I grew up in a community and a family where we're taught to be gracious, to be very humble, and to downplay, you know, ourselves. Again, falling into the shrinking of, you know, I'm just so grateful to be here. Well, just being here is not enough. You have to listen to me because I understand what I'm talking about, and it would be in your best interest to take my advice. I've come to a point in my career where when they don't take my advice, it hasn't worked well for them. But at the beginning of my career, it was always, you know, be humble, be grateful, just be happy that you're invited to the meetings. But I think again, that tightrope of how do we claim credit for our work to say, I did this and I'm proud of what I built while I was here. Because we don't have the titles oftentimes, right? I have never had an official title that led me the credibility in the formal structures, right? The title, you know, whatever they may be. I've also learned, as most of us may know on this call, the titles don't necessarily mean influence. It's the people who are doing the work and the expertise. And so my guidance for you would be, again, find a way that feels right to you, that you can show the work that you have done in service of, you know, the community that you're representing, and stand proud in that, right? Say, I am proud that I have done this, I achieved this. And again, will there be people who would be like, oh, you know, she's bragging, she's to this, she's to that? Of course, right? But the reality is that if you don't share with people the work that you have accomplished, your wins and your successes, then people won't know, and people won't know how, you know, all the dimensions that you bring into this work and your accomplishments. So, but it has to be in a way that is authentic to you, right? That feels right for you in terms of, I did this, I am proud, and I want to share it with my community as well.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I've really loved listening to your experiences and all of your advice. And just going back a little bit to when you were speaking about your work in like Congress and sort of like feeling fulfilled by your, I guess, space between the top level and like community and things like that. I feel like I've felt that before and I have also like pivoted in the work that I do because I felt like I was doing a lot of good work, but never really being close enough to like the people that it was supposed to be affecting or just like the outcomes that I wanted to see. And for me personally, and I don't know if you have dealt with this or can speak to it, but a lot of times in like campaign planning or a big project like development, a lot of it comes down to like stakeholder like management and like a lot of it can be like donor led priorities or like I was always feeling a little bit of a disconnect between how to feel like I was having an effect at a community level if I was aware that there would have been a different way if it had been all the way from the ground up, but there were donor led initiatives or priorities that then sort of came over and it didn't feel, I guess, as much of a compromise, but more of just like a this is where the money came from. And so the stakeholder becomes more important. Um, that was kind of a lot, but that's what you made me think of. And I was wondering if you've ever had to deal with that and how you have, or how to navigate that in advocacy spaces.
Absolutely. I love that question because it's a painful reality, right? Whoever, what's that saying? Whoever pays the piper calls the tune, right? We have to acknowledge the power that funding has in determining which projects are funded, which campaigns are prioritized, all the things, right? So the short answer to your question is yes, I've dealt with it. Yes, I continue to deal with it. And the reality is I would probably most likely have to continue to deal with it as long as we're living in the structure of society that we are when it comes about the power of money. The way that I've dealt with it is throughout my career, I have thought about this concept of impact. What does it mean to me in this moment, in this role, in the context of where I am? And identifying my sphere of influence, right? Even though we may not have titles, we have a sphere of influence that we have the power to manage or to imagine in any way that we want, right? And so those are two tactics that I have found that have gotten me through those painful realities of maybe this project is not 100% aligned with the North Star of the values that guide my work. But what's that piece? What's that piece that you can make yours and that you can lean into and say that this is something that I can build in my vision, in my sphere of influence on this particular project? It won't be the whole project, right? Most likely not. But what's that piece? What's that piece that you can make yours and make it in your vision that is aligned with what you want to do, with how you see the work happening? Again, are some ways that I have found, I think, the way I think to manage the insanity of funders who oftentimes mean well but have no understanding of what it takes to organize and build power, especially through a racial and equity, gender justice lens. So they throw money, right? And they say, we want you to do XYZ with the money, but are not trusting the people who live and breathe this work to say, I know the best way to invest this money. That's just not the system that we work in. Although there are conversations in philanthropy to try and take more integrated approaches to that process. But I want to again just affirm that is an issue, and it's a painful one, and it's also structural, right? In terms of money is power, right? And again, when funders give groups money, oftentimes it comes with that string. And again, my suggestion would be, based off of what I've learned how to manage that tension, is you want me to do X, Y, and Z. That's the deliverable. But I'm going to build a process that centers equity in all the ways that I can through my sphere of influence. I've done it throughout my career, time and time again. Funders want the deliverables, they want the metrics, they want you to check off the boxes oftentimes. Fine, I can give you that. But again, in my sphere of influence, thinking about the impact that I want to have in my time at this organization or on this campaign, I'm going to build out the process. I'm going to build out in such a way that reflects the values that are important to me while I'm driving towards the deliverables. And I hope that's helpful, but I do want to affirm you're absolutely right. It's an ugly reality. But again, always thinking about what does impact mean to you, identifying your sphere of influence, and building out, your sphere in a way that is true to you, and in such a way that you're proud of the work that you can do. And when it's time for you to move onwards and upwards, you can be proud to say, I built that.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So, ladies, if we could, please shower Naila, our speaker, our advocacy and action, with some virtual applause, some gamers, words of affirmation in the chat for sharing her time. I hope that you all really found this conversation just as productive and powerful and influential as you all are in your own work. Thank you on behalf of everyone. Again, you're free to stick around. I did ask that if folks, I know we lost some folks, but if folks have the ability or capacity to stick around until 8:10, then we can clear off our, we're just doing a little wind down. So we can just let you ladies know what we have planned next. And we had to, maybe wanted to pose to you all. But I honestly, I just could not interrupt or stop what was happening. It was too good. So, forgive me if we can go to 8:10, but if you have to early, I completely understand. So again, Naila, thank you so much. And I have my own question, but I'm gonna hold it. But I wanted to share with you all.
Thank you so much for happening. I have to hop off, but just thank you so much for your work and for leading this. And to all the women in the call, you are an inspiration. This work is hard, but I'm so inspired to see so many faces that reflect my own. And I am so honored to share this space with you, and really looking forward to staying connected to you in your work. I think someone dropped in my LinkedIn, so feel free to connect. And I look forward to crossing paths with you as we build our collective power and change systems that lead us to collective liberation. That's why I do the work that I do. So thank you so much. Everyone have a good night.
Before you go,
Yes.
I just want to personally thank you, because everyone, when you ask Naila to do something, she always shows up, and you show up with such authenticity and such, generosity. We really appreciate it. You are our first big speaker, and you're just inspirational. So I've had the pleasure to know Naila a little while. Always an impressed. Always appreciate you. So thanks so much for being here with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bev. Everyone have
Thank
a good
you.
rest of the night. All right, fight the power.